Hi, today we're talking about the sonnets. The only week that we're not really addressing one of Shakespeare's plays. And the sonnets are a lot of fun, I think. Um, Personally, to me, they reward a lot of reading and rereading. But there has been so much discussion about the sonnets too. Um, it's kind of important to recognize what we know and what's just speculation. So the thing with the sonnets, and I think we can kind of relate this to some maybe more familiar art forms, is Shakespeare's working in a form that I would argue had been played out. So Petrarch, the Italian medieval poet, writes in the 14th century the first of what we call these sonnet forms. He obviously is writing in Italian. And the Petrarchian sonnets are largely love sonnets. He is enamored of this woman, Laura, whom he cannot be with. He cannot marry, he cannot be with her. She is this great figure, really, the unattainable love. And the sonnets that he writes are in many ways worshiping her, her beauty, her virtue, etc., etc. Now, as I said, that's the 14th century. Shakespeare, of course, is writing at the end of the 16th and early 17th century. So time has passed. A lot of time has passed. And there have been a lot of people writing sonnets, including in England, in English. Okay, so Shakespeare is kind of bringing up the end of the train, if you will. And for that reason, I think it's interesting that Shakespeare plays with the form and our expectations in a lot of very serious ways. The form in English is different than the form in Italian in terms of the poetic structure. And I think you can read in the textbook, this guy Cohen, who I have no stories about. I don't know this guy. Wrote pretty well about the language differences and the structure. Still have a 14-line poem, okay? And the poems really are, they can be read individually, or you can read them as a big long sequence. Excuse me. And that's one of the things about the sonnet, right? In English, of course, the English sonnet is also 14 lines long. It tends to have a four-part structure, 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, and then 2 lines, right? So it's kind of geared on that. But here's where the fun actually is, okay, in my opinion. And that's the kind of overarching story, if you will, that is present within the sonnets as you read through them all the way. Now, I'm not asking you to read all the sonnets, by the way. I'm just asking you to read the sonnets that are listed in the discussion thread. Okay, so that's a pretty fair number of sonnets already. Okay, if you want to read more, that's great. The sonnets that Shakespeare writes can be roughly broken down into 3 major sections. Wait for it. The first section is about the first 17 sonnets are a tribute to the beauty of a young man. And they basically encourage this young man to procreate so that his beauty shall not be lost. Okay? And Shakespeare likes to use, shall we call it, some farm metaphors. Some of them suggestive, not crude, but suggestive. But it's all about, hey, don't be so into yourself, don't be like Narcissus and just, look at yourself in the water. But, you know, pass on your genes, as we would say nowadays, right? He's got good DNA and spread it outward through his children, right? So that these children will have these, they will be beautiful children with his beautiful DNA. Okay. So it's a little strange right from the beginning that it's focused on a young man, not a young woman. The tone of it is, as I said, kind of urgent. It reminds me, I know I may be going a bit astray here, but it reminds me a little bit about the portrait of Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray, pardon me, where this young man has a picture done of himself, artwork, painting, at his physical peak. Now, of course, if you know the Oscar Wilde story, you know that somehow, some way, from that point forward, Dorian Gray never ages. And the painting, which is kept in an attic underneath a blanket, ages and shows all the signs of his horrible sins. But what's happening here is this is just an opportunity to pass along the genetic structure of a very fine young man. It gets a little bit interesting after that. From 18 to 126, I'm talking about the sonnets, it moves into love. Now, depending on which critic you read and which sort of agenda people may have, right? Some people look at this love as strictly an admiration, a finer love, or is it homoerotic? I think there's clear evidence on both sides. And so you can read whatever you wish. Then then people want to make the jump. Does that mean Shakespeare was really a homosexual in real life? Did he really have a thing for this particular person? Who was that particular person? There's always that game to play too. My take is it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. But if you look at the poetry in this section, there are some things that come up that you might say come up in a lot of relationships. There is that first ecstatic love, right? Where everything is fabulous and wonderful. But then the speaker starts to feel more insecure. There are a couple aspects to this insecurity. One is an age difference. The speaker clearly is older than the young man. So for instance, in Sonnet 35, all of a sudden there's a sense that there is a wrong. Something has happened. The beloved has received a text message he doesn't want to show Shakespeare. I don't know. Something could have happened, right? And the doubt, the insecurity, which may be based in difference of appearance or simply in age, starts to well up. And there's more discussion of this difference. The other thing that happens is a rival poet for the young lover as well. So you have these two things going on. You have the rival and you have the insecure narrator who's feeling the difference in age and appearance and is starting to have this kind of I'm not worthy thing happening. But you don't get that, right away. It trickles through, it trickles through, it trickles through. And that's why you have so many of these poems where you can kind of pick out. It is in this section that you see some of the most popular of the poems. Then 127 announces the entrance of what we call the Dark Lady. And this is what I call the Betty and Veronica syndrome. If you're a reader of the Archie comic books, right? Betty is the blonde, Veronica is the dark-haired woman. And the blonde girl is, of course, good, virtuous. She's Archie's girlfriend. Veronica is evil and scheming, right? So blonde, good, dark hair, bad. Who would ever thought that, right? And so when Shakespeare's narrator gets involved with the Dark Lady, it's like he hates himself. He's pulled into it. This is not love, this is lust. And this is degrading, but he can't help it. Stop me before I sin again, right? And then it progresses because he can't trust the lady. He wonders if the lady is making the moves on his young man. And it continues and continues. And of course, he gets older and older. It's kind of a fascinating psychological narration, if you think about it this way, right? And that's what I think is so much fun. Now, as I said, a lot of this is, in some ways, a rewrite of Petrarch, right? In Petrarch, you have the blonde, Laura, beautiful, unattainable, virtuous. In Shakespeare, it's like he's playing with that idea. He's saying, no. Here's how things really are, right? And you can see a number of the sonnets as kind of critiques of that. One of my favorites is 130, in which he talks about loving the Dark Lady for being a real person, right? It's a straight up critique of the Petrarchian love sonnet conventions, of this unattainable goddess. He says, my mistress, when she goes, walks on the ground. Right? She's a real woman. She's a real human. And the argument can be made, of course, that this is actually what real life is about. Not this idealized Laura, but this dark lady. This is how people really live. This is how people really love. Not this, goddess in the sky. And there's a lot of interesting things that you can say about that. So I think when you look at the sonnets, look at it with that storyline in mind. As I said, I'm not too interested in the historicity. Are we really seeing a confession of homosexual attraction from William Shakespeare towards a particular precise individual? I don't care. Right? That's for somebody else to care about. What I care about is what he's doing with the poetry, how he plays with our expectations. And you can look at individual poems and see discussions of time, age, beauty, decay, corruption, elation, sadness, anger, remorse, suspicion, jealousy. There's this whole range of emotions that travels through the sonnets. And that's what I hope that you get into and explore and come to appreciate and maybe in fact enjoy. So take care this week. Enjoy the sonnets.